Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 175 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things used to be alive. My name is Gavin, and this is actually editing Gavin after we recorded the episode. I just want to let you guys know that this episode is going to end a little differently than normal episodes do. The episode officially ends, the actual meat of the episode ends at around the 54-minute mark. But as you can probably see, this episode's a bit longer than that. I just had a little message that I wanted to tack on to the end of this, but I didn't want to put it up front because Fia worked really hard on this episode, and I didn't want to sort of upstage her in that way. So if you want a sort of just special message from me about just my thoughts about some of the things going on in the world at the time, these days, hang around until after that time. But enjoy this episode. I had a really good time listening to Fia talk about some of the stuff she does for her research, and hopefully you will too.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 175 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, that is Gavin and Fia, and friends, have you ever been personally by Verizon?
No.
I can't say that I have.
That's my one swear for the episode.
That's not entirely true, I guess. There was just a widespread Verizon outage like a week ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe.
Yeah, but you weren't personally.
No,
I already used my one swear for the episode. You weren't personally screwed by Verizon at that point.
No, I was not. That was a widespread screwing. But this is Mike in particular.
Yeah, me in particular, because at my house, internet goes out. Call up Verizon. They send a guy out, fixes it. He has no idea how it happened, but he fixes the problem. That's great. Internet's good for a day and a half. All of a sudden, internet goes out again. I make a phone call on Saturday. Thursday is when the guy's coming.
Yeah, that sucks.
Now, a little bit of that is like timing when I can be there.
Oh, gotcha.
So now I'm recording podcast at girlfriend's house. Girlfriend, delightful human being. You should all meet my girlfriend one of these times. Keeps her apartment at 80 degrees.
Yes.
You are not allowed to support this.
We've discussed on the pod before that Mike's girlfriend is from South America, but no, that is we discussed before we started recording. She does not pay for heating in her apartment.
No, she does not.
Yeah,
which makes a whole lot more sense.
And it's I'm now a dad. I've become very protective of the thermostat. I feel like that's just I feel like that's just an instinct that awakens in you when you become a dad. So
I do have to say, for fairness, I was just gonna record this at school or something, and girlfriend very generously offered. She's like, "Why don't you just come to my apartment and record?" And so,
very nice.
Despite the fact that her apartment was warm when I got here, it was very nice of her to offer and let me be here.
Yes, thank you, girlfriend.
Yes.
Thank you, girlfriend. No thanks to Verizon. How are you guys doing?
Good. I'm tired. Little baby Igneous is sleeping better than most kids, but that doesn't mean she's sleeping well. She still gets us up usually once a night, which is more than I'm used to. But yeah, all things considered, tired, but okay.
I'm good. I'm very ready for the Super Bowl halftime.
Yeah, something else we talked about before we started recording is Fia's love of Bad Bunny.
Yes, Bad Bunny is our new Lord and Savior in 2026. So be sure to check him out.
Now, Fia, question.
You said that like he was some underground indie artist that you were recommending differently.
Yeah, have you heard about this new guy on the music scene? Now, Fia, do you just enjoy the music, or do you actually understand what is being said?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I do enjoy most of the music just for the beat. I don't know a lot of what is being said, but there are good chunks of the songs that I know what he's saying, and I'm like, okay. And then there are a couple that I've actually just read the English translation of it all the way through and cried. So
I took 1 semester of Spanish, so I think I know what's going on.
That 1 semester of Spanish coming in really handy in middle of Pennsylvania?
There's a couple towns around here that are that have a pretty large Hispanic population.
Really?
Yeah.
I would not have guessed that.
Neither would I before I moved here. Anyway.
All right. Yeah, let's do... Is it housekeeping next? Is that how the schedule works?
Absolutely. So today, it's an episode that ends in 5 or 0, which means it's not my problem. But because it ends in 5, that means it's Fia's problem to talk to us today. So Fia's going to be talking to us about some fun stuff that she works on for her research, and that's just really important in science generally, which is isotope analysis. But before we get into that, don't forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to give us feedback about the show and suggest any future topics you'd like to hear about on the pod. And if you'd like to be a guest on the pod, be sure to fill out our guest form, which can be found down below in the show notes. Hey, Gavin, what's next episode's topic? Oh, that's a good question, Gavin. Thanks for asking. We had a discussion before we started this that somehow we have avoided doing a crabs episode this whole time, which seems like a crime.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing an episode all about crabs in 2 weeks. So look forward to that. Yeah, so with that, before we get into the full content of the episode, Mike, what happened today in history?
Got a couple of cool things that happened today in history. First off, today in 1991, they spelled his name wrong here, which is hilarious. But today in 1991, Alex Trebek becomes the first person to host 3 American game shows at the same time.
Wow.
What were the other
He did,
two?
obviously Jeopardy. Do you have any guesses what the other 2 might be? I would not have gotten this.
So they're not, are they like mainstream?
I have heard of one of these. I had not heard of the other one.
I know it's not Price is Right or
It
Wheel
is
of
not
Fortune.
Price is Right. It is not Wheel of Fortune.
Yeah, those are the only
it's
ones
called-
I know.
Yeah, Classic Concentration and To Tell the Truth.
Okay, I'd heard of Concentration. I've not heard of the other one.
I see it was opposite for me.
Okay.
I had no idea what any of that was all about, but shout out to Alex Trebek. Gotta love that guy. In addition, today in 2004, Mark Zuckerberg launches Facebook from his Harvard dorm room.
Take me back. Take me back.
Go
back in time.
Go Zuck. Oh, and also apparently today in 2020, Donald Trump gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Rush Limbaugh. So we'll just end it on that one. All right, Fia, do the episode now. Go from there.
Okay. All right, so for this episode topic, I wanted to talk about stable isotope ecology. Basically, in a nutshell, I want to say you are what you eat, but isotopically. So before we get started, I want to ask y'all a question. All right, theoretically, if I hand you a fish from Florida Bay, let's say a juvenile snapper, how would you figure out what actually fueled its growth? I'll let Mike answer this first.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
I mean...
Okay. If I give you a juvenile snapper, a fish, a small fish from Florida.
And it's alive.
It doesn't need to be.
It doesn't have to be alive. We'll say it's
not
dead.
important.
It's dead.
Okay.
It's freshly dead, though. How would you figure out what it ate?
How would I figure out what it ate?
Yes.
So, I'm assuming the too easy answer is that I cut it open, I look in whatever its fish stomach is, and just see what it most recently had to eat. But I'm assuming you're asking more of a long-term question?
I'm not really asking. I'm just wanting to know your thoughts. You're right. That is definitely a method that we use in science to look at fish diet. But there's also some other ways that can get us into more detail, and it's a little better because, stomach contents are what was just eaten by the fish, and sometimes it's all degraded and digested, so you can't really tell what's what. Gavin, do you have any other thoughts about this?
You look at its bones.
Interesting. I don't know anything about fish bones, but please enlighten me.
So, Oh, well, that was gonna be in an isotope thing.
Oh.
You
Oh, I
can
see.
look at its bones in a number of ways, like chemically look at, not just like under a microscope or something.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm sure you can do it from other places, but being a paleontologist, bones are kind of just what I gravitate to, or mostly teeth. Teeth are real good for almost anything paleontology.
Yes.
You see, part of the reason I had you repeat the question is I was trying to think of like a smart way to say, like, you just look at what the fish is made of and do science to it, because like obviously you just kind of like, you look at what the fish is made of, you figure out like what that stuff would have been made of in the past, you do the science,
you say a prayer to your picture of Bill Nye that you have hanging up, that's legally required in every lab,
of course.
Yes. Bill pokes his head out of the picture and tells you the science.
Right, like that's all I got. Like that.
You nailed it.
Can we end the podcast now?
Yeah, let's just end it here. This was great, guys. But yeah, in all seriousness, we use stable isotopes to tell us what the fish or any organisms eat. Typically, in my realm of the world, we'll do like tissue samples, from muscle or organs. But yeah.
Hey, Fia.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll get to this. What's an isotope?
Yeah, we're about to find a convenient way to ask that.
Right. Yeah, so
I think I might know the answer.
We got a little off track. I'm gonna take a step back here. We're gonna talk about stable isotopes, what they actually are, why ecologists obsess over isotope ratios and why that's important, and how this approach has reshaped how we understand a lot of food web dynamics like seagrass, mangrove, and coral reef dynamics, especially here in Florida. So, before we dive in, have you ever heard of stable isotopes, and what comes to your mind when you think about stable isotopes?
So, I've definitely heard the term stable isotopes before. I think I'm legally required to give a shout out to the Albuquerque Isotopes minor league baseball team.
Is that really the name? That kills. I love that.
I believe they're in Albuquerque, but yeah, the Isotopes were
that's so fun.
A minor league baseball team.
I mean, it makes sense. Different kind of isotope, though. I'm assuming those would be radioactive isotopes from all the nuclear tests that we did in New Mexico.
Right.
That would be radioactive isotopes, not stable isotopes.
Yeah.
Now, for stable, like, aren't isotopes like atoms with different amounts of either neutrons or electrons?
Neutrons. You're very good.
Different amounts of neutrons, but the same amount of protons.
You're killing it. You just taking my whole script and throwing it in the toilet.
No, but like this is one of the things where like I have heard this before, and I'm just gonna run with it because it's not often.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because sometimes well, now I almost want to describe what an atom is.
Go for it.
Yeah.
So an atom is obviously, I think most people are aware, made up of a proton, a neutron, and an electron. And protons and neutrons are the part in the nucleus, they're the part in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the number of protons that determines what that atom is, what the properties of the atom are going to be. If it has one proton, it's always going to be hydrogen. If it's got two, it's always going to be helium, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And we usually like to think of it as, well, they're always going to, if there's one proton, there's going to be one neutron. Two protons, two neutrons.
Yep.
But in the real world, that's not always the case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's just change this to Mike Takes the Wheel episode.
I'm flying right now.
Yeah.
I am on a high.
Yeah.
I am as high as my girlfriend's air conditioning right now. Like
80 degrees.
80 degrees. Usually it's 81. It was down when I came here today.
Wow.
I think this is kind of the extent of my knowledge here.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that in some cases when there's different amounts of neutrons in a particular atom, sometimes that goes really well and things are stable and that atom can just kind of keep existing in that state in perpetuity, or something close to it. And sometimes those atoms are not stable and will very quickly decay or break down.
Yep.
And those are what we'd call radioactive isotopes, I believe.
Yep. Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
And we're talking about stable isotopes.
So yeah, today
correct?
We're talking about stable isotopes. So we're talking about
All
those
right.
ones that chemically they behave like almost the same, but physically they have slightly different masses because they have a different number of neutrons. So, for example, carbon, it has 6 protons, and so it can have 6 neutrons, which would mean that's carbon-12, or 7 neutrons, and that would be carbon-13. And both are stable, meaning they don't decay or emit radiation. And so, yeah, we don't have to worry about any glowing fish or that jazz.
And then separately, just because when people hear carbon and isotope, they often think of like carbon dating. Not what this is.
Different.
The carbon you use for carbon dating is carbon-14. So 6 protons, 8 neutrons.
Yep.
And that is radioactive.
Yep.
Those carbon-14 atoms will be slowly shooting off particles until they become stable. That's what radiation is these atoms that are not stable shooting off bits and pieces of themselves until they get to a point where they are stable.
Yep. It's crazy what just 1 neutron will do to an atom. And then to you. So the key thing here is that biological and chemical processes in our bodies, in plants, in any living thing, they don't treat these different stable isotopes exactly the same. So we're going to go through some key terms here. There's light isotopes, and then there's heavy isotopes. So the light ones are the ones that have less neutrons, and the heavy ones are the ones with more neutrons. And so these processes that like living organisms go through prefer lighter isotopes because they're easier to move around, easier to react, easier to assimilate. And this is kind of where you're able to see some differences in different organisms and even within different species of things with these stable isotopes. So, am I making sense so far? Lighter isotopes are just a little easier to use.
I imagine part of that's just because there's less stuff per atom, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Less can go wrong. Sure.
Okay. So, why do we look at ratios? Why don't we just measure how much carbon-13 is in something? So, the heavy isotopes. And that's because it doesn't really mean anything by itself. What we care about is the ratio of these heavy to light isotopes. So, example, carbon-13 to carbon-12. And those ratios can tell us about processes, not just quantity. So in ecology, we'll usually express the ratios using a delta notation. So it can either look like a weird, funny D or like a triangle. And then for carbon, it's 13 carbon, and then for nitrogen, which is the other main one we're going to talk about, it's 15. And so basically what this delta ratio is asking is how different is this sample from a known standard. So basically, you do a bunch of chemical stuff, you pray to the gods, and you get your you get your delta numbers, and then from a sample that you're interested in, so let's say like a leaf, and then you compare it to a known standard that has like a set number that you can always compare it to. And this matters because there are different primary producers, so like seagrasses and mangroves, that they do photosynthetic pathways differently. There's also, it also matters like where your source of carbon and or nitrogen can come from. So like farm runoff has like specific signatures of nitrogen, because that's in fertilizers. And there's also environmental drivers that can make these delta ratios a little different. So temperature and light availability can change how these things look even within the same like species under different conditions. And so you end up with these distinct isotope ratios.
Mm-hmm.
And those ratios get passed up the food web. So in a very real sense, every organism is carrying a chemical record of its energy sources.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is why I say you are what you eat, but isotopically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well done.
So now the big two that I want to talk about, carbon and nitrogen. We'll start off with carbon. Delta 13 carbon. This is mostly about looking at your source. So where did the carbon come from? Delta 13 carbon changes very little as you move up the food web. So you guys remember in like science class, a food web where you've got like plants on the bottom, and then you got like herbivores, and then you've got consumers, and then like a top predator on top.
Mm-hmm.
Is this ringing bells for you, Mike?
I don't think so.
Okay, what about a food chain? Like if I told you...
Yes. Yes, okay. Yeah, okay, now I'm back on.
Yes. They're very much similar, except for food web, you start entangling like multiple...
Oh, yes, okay,
level.
I'm a moron. Yes, I don't get what you're talking about now.
Okay, cool. So basically this stable isotope of carbon, it doesn't change as you move up the food web. So this makes it a really easy way to tell what primary producer or what plant your original food chain started from.
Mm-hmm.
So these changes, they're usually less than 1 per mil, which I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing this right, but basically it's like per mil is like by the 1,000 or parts per 1,000. And it's like similar to how percent is like a value out of 100. This is like percent, but out of 1,000, and it's called per mil. Okay, so theoretically, in my world of ecology and marine stuff, if you know the delta 13 carbon of seagrass, mangrove, and phytoplankton, you can often tell which one ultimately fueled or was consumed by like a higher level, like a fish. So if we go back to that snapper analogy in the beginning, we could just open up its guts and look at what's inside there, or we could take a sample of its tissue, send it off to the chemical people, get this stable isotope value ratio, and see, is the carbon more similar to seagrass, or is it more similar to mangroves, or is it more similar to phytoplankton, and see like what it was eating, or even what its prey was eating. Does this make sense?
Yeah,
I think so. Like just being able to follow everything kind of up and down the chain.
Exactly.
Like that seems to, like I imagine all this gets way more complicated out in the real world instead of just in a textbook.
Yeah.
But like
I mean, not that much more complicated.
No,
than
not that much. Yeah.
Really?
This is really
okay.
it. Yeah. This is the basis.
From my experience, this also works fine with terrestrial stuff. So like my main research stuff in grad school is about horses, and a big part of how you tell, other than the teeth, which mammals are lucky in that their teeth are very diagnostic and can do a really good job of telling you what the thing ate, just kind of by looking at its teeth. But in a place where, or time, say there's a transitional species that was going from eating one type of plant to a different type of plant, and you're not sure which one it might have ate more of, you can do things like this, because grasses, not non-seed grasses, land grasses,
yes,
do photosynthesis differently than trees, for example.
Yep.
And because of that difference in photosynthesis, the grass, the blades of grass have a different, C13 ratio than the leaves of a tree do. And because this has been studied so extensively, and oftentimes things are eating like a mix of things, so it's pretty uncommon that something is eating only one thing.
Right.
And you can sort of do this to figure out not just, it was eating more grass than it was leaves. You can be, it was eating ballpark 70% of its diet was leaves, 30% of its diet was grass.
Yep.
Ballpark.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's extremely helpful. And there's, especially once you get into paleontology, there's a little bit, not as much with carbon, but with some other stable isotopes that are used for different things. You kind of also have to worry about environmental contamination of it. Because, if the bones have been sitting in the ground for a few million years, and, the groundwater in this area happens to just have a lot of C13 in it, that potentially could alter the chemistry in a way that would make it look like the animal's eating more grass than they would otherwise, So that's a nice, convenient... I'm sure there are lots of other troubles that modern ecology has in this sense than paleontology has, but... But yeah, so that is something that you always have to keep in mind, as well as environmental contamination from that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you basically nailed it, and great transition into what I'm going to talk about, because I'm going to talk about some more photosynthetic pathways too. But in Florida system, this is like really powerful, because we know that seagrasses tend to have a relatively what we call enriched delta 13 carbon, which means it's confusing because it's all on a scale from 0 to negative. Yeah. So it's like the more negative it is, the more depleted it is in the 13 carbon. And the more closer to 0, the more enriched it is with this 13 carbon. So seagrasses, they tend to have an enriched carbon. So their range is I think negative 18 to around negative 5. But mangroves are strongly depleted in this 13. They don't like using this 13 carbon. And so their range is really more like negative 25 to negative 30. And then phytoplankton kind of sits somewhere in between. And that's because of their photosynthetic pathways. So mangroves are often the easiest carbon source to trace up isotopically in coastal systems, because their delta 13 carbon values are very depleted, so they don't have as much of the carbon 13. Mangroves use this thing called C3 photosynthetic pathway, which it strongly discriminates, or it doesn't like the heavier carbons, so the ones with the extra neutron, and which is carbon 13. As a result, mangrove leaves typically have that lower negative value, often around negative 25 to negative 30. And that's much more negative than other coastal primary producers, such as seagrass and marine phytoplankton. Even though they are still, all three of them are all still C3 photosynthetic pathways, they're using different sources of carbon that make them different in these delta 13 values. So mangroves, they're in the air. They can use just air carbon dioxide as their carbon
right, because they do it with their leaves, which are
exactly
out of
in
the
air.
water.
Yeah, but seagrasses and phytoplankton, they are underwater, and seagrasses in particular, in the water there's not really a lot of carbon dioxide, but there is a lot of bicarbonate, which they have this special adaptation that makes them able to use the bicarb for their photosynthesis. And the bicarbonate is more rich in that heavy carbon-13. And so, as you can imagine, they end up getting more of that heavy, stable isotope in them. And then you see that when you look at their delta 13 values. And
that makes a lot of sense. I never thought about it with like the difference between just the air and the water also being a factor.
Right. Yes.
Because and bicarbonate for the less chemically inclined listeners,
like me.
Yeah, so it is a compound that has it's basically what happens when you mix carbon dioxide and water. And so it's also a major part of like the things that make their shells, like the animals like clams or lots of other plankton and things that make their clams out of calcite, which is most things in the ocean that have a shell of some kind. They basically take calcium and bicarbonate and turn it into calcium carbonate or calcite. So it's basically the chemical reaction that sort of combines the molecules of water and carbon dioxide.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that, because I forgot to talk about what bicarbonate is. But yeah. So it's really cool that, there are these different plants that you can actually tell what they're doing and why their values are different in their heavier stable isotopes. And so because these carbon stable isotope ratios don't change much as you go up the food web, you're able to trace it back to the photosynthetic, the primary producers, the start of the whole basis of the ecosystem,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I'm going to switch over to nitrogen. So this is delta 15 nitrogen. So nitrogen in its normal state has 14 neutrons. Here we're talking about when it has 15. And this tells us who is eating who or what. So nitrogen is where trophic ecology really comes in. So like we talked about before, we're talking about that food web or food chain where you see plants on the bottom, you've got herbivores, predators, and then like top predator on top. And that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about trophic ecology. Trophic means relating to feeding or nutrition. And nitrogen isotope ratios can help us understand where each plant or animal falls on the food web without having to actually sit there and watch them eat or open them up and see what they're eating. So as nitrogen moves up the food web, the delta 15 nitrogen becomes enriched. There's more of the 15 nitrogen compared to the 14 nitrogen. And this happens at about 3 to 4 per mil per trophic level. So again, like, think of it like percentages, but per million, per thousand. And so so it's different based on different ecosystems, obviously, but the higher you go up the food chain, the more heavier their ratios become. So more closer to 0.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that this delta 15 nitrogen can act like a trophic ruler. But it's not always a perfect system because these nitrogen ratios also depend on nitrogen sources. So again, like we talked about with fertilizers, can also be dependent on microbial processes, especially when you get into like the sediment. There's denitrifying and nitrifying bacteria, and then as well as anthropogenic inputs like sewage.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
poop has a lot of nitrogen in it.
It do be having a lot of nitrogen.
Yeah,
Is that part of the reason why it's good fertilizer?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Long story short, plants are mostly limited by their availability of nitrogen and phosphorus.
Yes.
And both of those two things are very abundant in poop because our bodies need some of it, but not as much as we typically get in our environment. So we poop it out. And that's why when you put a bunch of fertilizer on plants, they're like, oh, this thing that is normally the limiting factor to how much I can grow, I now have a ton of. And that's why we use it as fertilizer.
Yeah. So, back to nitrogen. The delta 15 nitrogen, it can tell you rough trophic position or where you lie on the food web, but only relative to a baseline. So that's kind of where you need to have, like, it's important when you're studying ecosystems to take samples of all the different animals and plants and sediment in your environment. So that way you have a good understanding of where the bottom of the food web is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. And so that was carbon and nitrogen. Now I would just like to talk a little bit about seagrasses in Florida.
Please do.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. So Florida is basically isotope heaven for seagrass studies because there's a lot of it in a very large geographical range. And we also have 4 different species of seagrass too. And so Florida seagrasses often have delta 13 carbon values that are much less negative than phytoplankton. So like we talked about before, it can take bicarbonate, and which is heavy in these carbon 13s. They are also much more productive than phytoplankton in the right environmental conditions, and so that leads to a lot of enriched delta 13 signatures. You can find different signatures of delta 13 carbon within the same seagrass in different places. So for example, there's the Florida Bay, which is down at the bottom of Florida, right above the Florida Keys, the Indian River Lagoon, which is on the east coast, and Big Bend, which is on the Gulf side or the west coast. And so all of these different places can have different isotopic signatures, and that makes seagrass carbon relatively easy to identify in food webs. But here's the key misconception here. Most animals are not directly eating seagrass. Instead, seagrass carbon often enters food webs through epiphytes, which means upon a plant. So there's kind of little microorganisms growing on the seagrass that are yummy and delicious for a lot of animals. Seagrass carbon can also enter the food web through detritus. So once the seagrass dies and starts to break down into the soil, a lot of nasty invertebrates, I shouldn't say nasty, beautiful invertebrates, love to just go to town on detritus. And then also through microbial pathways.
So there's a middleman, basically, is what you're telling me. Because the seagrass doesn't get eaten directly by...
Yes.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, it took me a minute to understand what you're saying, but yes, exactly. Is like,
yeah,
there are obviously organisms that do directly eat seagrass, like manatees and sea turtles, but a lot of other organisms often eat like the dead seagrass or the stuff on the seagrass, and so little bits of its carbon can enter through the food web that way.
Okay.
And then now I just want to shift over to mangroves. So I'm giving you a brief seagrass, then mangroves, and then we'll figure out how we can connect the two and wrap this up. So mangroves are a different isotopic story because they are C3 plants that take in CO2 from the air, which is way different in their delta 13 values. But the good news is that it makes them very easy to trace in coastal systems. So for a long time, ecologists assumed that mangroves were a dominant energy source for nearby food webs in areas where like mangroves were used as like nursery habitats for like small fish.
Right.
But stable isotopes kind of complicate the idea because isotope studies show that the mangrove carbon contributes strongly to the detrital pool, but often less directly to fish biomass. And so instead, the fish biomass is, or the fish, what am I trying to say? The fish diet is more based on phytoplankton or benthic algae. And while the mangroves are still kind of important, they're not directly the main food source and maybe playing more of a protection role than food.
If I had to guess, that would have been my guess, because I feel like there's not a lot of fish adapted to, like, eating leaves. Because that's mostly where it's coming from, right? Is, like, leaves fall off the tree into the water. And so I feel like
you could also have, like, roots as well.
Right, but, yeah, I guess stuff could eat the roots.
So
but
in
then,
a way it's...
But then the mangrove wouldn't stay for very long.
Right. I would say it's also very much like a middleman situation where like the roots are a structure that a bunch of little like epiphytes or invertebrates like mussels or oysters can grow upon them and then are this nice little dish or like a feeding vessel, just like seagrass, where there's like...
When a fish comes to eat the barnacle that's attached to the mangrove, they take a little chunk of mangrove with it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also super context dependent too. This is like the highlight of my dissertation is learning that everything is context dependent. And very rarely do two systems ever actually behave the same. Which is why it's always important to test theories in different locations across the world. But off of that tangent, let's wrap this up into connecting habitats. So, not only can we trace carbon in different primary producers, but we can also follow carbon across different ecosystems. So, one of the really cool things that I have in my dissertation is I'm looking at habitat connectivity across mangroves, seagrasses, and hard bottom habitats, which are kind of like coral reefs, but like not really. Less cool. Less extensive.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so stable isotopes can help us show how connected these coastal habitats really are. And so there's this... this well-known concept that a lot of juvenile coral reef fish will start off in mangroves when they're tiny, and then they move into seagrass meadows, and then they get bigger, and then they eventually recruit to coral reefs. And you can actually see that in their isotopic signatures, meaning their isotopes reflect multiple habitats integrated over time.
Mm-hmm.
And this is especially clear when you analyze different types of tissue. So muscle versus liver tissue, which would be like short-term versus long-term integration of these carbon sources. And so even though we said, like mangroves and seagrasses aren't necessarily one-to-one directly contributing to these fish's diets, their carbon signatures are still by default ending up in there via detritus or epiphytes. And so the stable isotopes don't just tell you where energy comes from, but it also tells you how organisms move through landscapes, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. There's, not to keep bringing it back to the land.
No, please.
But yeah, there's some really cool strontium. There's a fun element for you. Strontium isotope analyses that help us figure out not necessarily like migratory paths of certain extinct mammals, like things like mammoths or an extinct species of giant wombat from Australia, I think has also been studied for this. But strontium is a relatively rare element in the Earth, and it also has two isotopes, one of which is much more common than the other. But because it is so rare, you can basically figure out, like, as they add, especially mammoths and other, like, large, like their relatives, proboscideans, like, as they, like, add layers to their tusks, you can sort of figure out, they do that at a regular pace. And so you can sort of figure out, okay, over, this time span of however many layers of tusk, they went from, an area that had this much strontium ratio to one that had this other strontium ratio to this other one. And you can look at the rocks in the area and be like, okay, it sure looks like they were moving from here to here to here.
Yeah.
And that's something that's been looked at for a number of, like, large mammal species, about how they move around their much large scale environments, like, potentially whole continent or regions. But yeah, you can just as easily do it, provided you have the right isotope and you understand the isotope well enough, on these like smaller scale, place to place studies.
Exactly. It's just so awesome what stable isotopes have the power to do. But of course, we can't just assume that they are all powerful and magic.
Yeah.
They do thus have their limitations and caveats. And so some key limitations include overlapping of source signatures. So definitely, like, phytoplankton and seagrass have a good bit of range of overlap. Macroalgae is the worst. That it goes, like, it is all over, like goes through the seagrass range, the mangrove range, the phytoplankton range. Just awful. Which makes things really confusing when there's macroalgae in your system. But yeah, there's also baseline variability, some assumptions about fractionation in the isotopes, and that they don't or do at a specific rate. And then some temporal mismatches between, like, sources and consumers, which is why modern isotope ecology should emphasize multiple tracers, baseline sampling, and explicitly show, quantify, or explain the uncertainty behind their findings, which is why we have, ranges of isotopes ratios instead of just, like, one specific number. And so, wrapping up, why does this all matter? Especially now. Well, for coastal systems, all ecosystems really, but in my case, coastal ecosystems are changing, and they're shifting due to nutrient inputs, especially near big anthropogenic areas or highly developed coastal areas, and also because seagrass and mangroves are being lost and also now being restored. And so stable isotopes give us a tool that can help us track energy pathways, how do they respond to these changes in the environment, and can actually help us understand how restoration efforts are working throughout the food web. And so, with that pretty much sums up my stable isotope ecology chat. Did you guys have any thoughts or fun things that you liked about this?
I love the fact that I knew what an isotope was.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you, Mike. That was a huge win.
But it's cool to just hear about how, like, the amount of science that gets done, to vastly oversimplify it, but you can figure out what people are eating, or what animals are eating, what substances are, like, what they're part of. Just hearing that process is, to me, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this was just barely scratching on the surface of all the crazy things you can do with isotopes.
Yeah.
Like, another brief example going back to nitrogen, and I'm pretty sure it's using the same ratio, but in clams, like, there's just little bits of nitrogen. They like add to their shell at a certain interval, right? And little bits of nitrogen get added in, even though their shell's not like made of nitrogen. It's just in the water, right? And so you could basically look at each layer that they added on and use that to see, like, how their environment is changing through time.
Wow.
Yeah. And so people have done that to be like, okay, this, clam from, 20 million years ago, throughout its life, it lived in a place, when it was first, born or started secreting its shell. Its, environment had lots of nitrogen in it. As it went on its life, it got a lot less nitrogen. You can also use that to tell, to a degree, like, seasonality, because the amount of nitrogen in the water changes throughout the different seasons.
Yeah. That still applies today, too. I didn't mention seasonality, but yeah.
Yeah. And this is also stable oxygen isotopes is a big part of how we know anything about paleoclimate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's a pretty fixed ratio of climate. Like if it's, again, more complicated, but basically at this oxygen isotope ratio, it's roughly this temperature. At this other one, it's roughly this temperature. And we know that scale pretty well. And by looking at all the phytoplankton, you just drill a hole in, like, the ocean. And as you dig it up, you can look at the oxygen isotopes in the shells of these different phytoplankton. And that will tell you, give or take, pretty close to what temperature it was when that thing was alive. Wow. So there's, again, just absolutely bananas things that we can do with stable isotopes. It's crazy.
Yeah.
One more just kind of fun little piece here that's not super relevant to the discussion today, but I'm going to continue in the long-running tradition of men telling people to watch YouTube videos. There's a YouTube video. I just went and looked up what it was called. It's called "The Man Who Tried to Fake an Element." It is from a guy named Bobby Broccoli, I guess, on YouTube. It is 80 minutes long. I was engrossed the entire time. Like, there is, to make a long story short, and you two can probably speak more to this than I can, we are basically done, like, finding elements in nature. Like, we're not going to go out in the field and be like, oh my God, there's a new one.
We have been for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a bunch of dorks in labs, like, doing science and finding elements that exist for, like, a nanosecond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And there's this one guy that was really good at finding elements, and everyone's like, yeah, this guy's good. And then he kept finding more elements, and then all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And then lawyers get involved, and his reputation is smeared. It's fantastic. You should go watch it.
That's really funny.
I was engrossed the entire time. The Man Who Tried to Fake an Element on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't know what the heaviest naturally occurring element is. I feel like it's probably somewhere...
It's probably your mom.
Well, that's better than anything I was about to say, so I think that's a good place to end on.
And on that note, this has been episode 175 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, that was Gavin, and Fia was leading our episode today. Thanks to all of you guys. We'll see you guys back here in about 2 weeks for our next episode. Until then, take care, everybody.
All right. Well, here we are at the end of the episode after Fia gave us all that wonderful information. And so I do have a script for this, but I'm probably still going to ramble anyway. So it's been a little while since I've done an update on what the federal government has been doing regarding science for a few reasons. First is that there's just been so much of it that it's been really hard to find one thing each episode to talk about, even when just narrowly looking through the lens of how science in this country is being affected by the government. But secondly, I've just been largely feeling really hopeless about it, to be honest with you. The damage that's being done to just the norms and rules that the government is supposed to follow, both generally and to science in particular, it just feels so large and fast that it's hard to find motivation to talk about it, even though I know that is the point of them doing things so large and fast. And like a lot of people, over the last month, I've been doom scrolling a lot of social media, which always makes you feel worse. And also, like a lot of people, I've seen videos of the same two people being shot and killed over and over and over and over again, including a nurse, someone who practices an infinitely more practical and much harder type of science than I do. And it just made me feel even more hopeless about a lot of things, but mostly just what kind of country and world my now almost 7-month-old daughter, little baby Igneous, is going to grow up in. And then, as the days kind of went on, and I just saw more things besides just all those videos of the same couple of events, that hopelessness kind of started to give way to just the smallest spark of hope. Mostly brought on by the people of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and also Maine, which has not been talked about nearly as much, but it was, a lot of terrible things were happening up there until recently as well. But just doing the small things that they can to keep their rights and to help protect their neighbors. But the thing that cemented it as a spark in my mind is actually sort of, as Mike kind of joked at the end of the episode there, a guy recommending you a YouTube video to watch. But it was a video from a YouTuber that I watch pretty frequently called Technology Connections. As you can tell by the name, not a political channel, not even like a paleontology or like science per se channel. Long story short, he makes videos about how the everyday technological things that we take for granted work, like refrigerators, humidifiers, the power grid, etc. But he's just a quirky guy who does it in a really interesting way. He made a very good and very long video about renewable energy, which I'll link down below. The video basically is about how stupid it is for so many reasons, but mostly the cost that we keep burning gas and oil for so many things. And he used cars for his main example, but he ends the video with a transition to the politics of renewable energy, and then from there, a transition to this political moment that we all kind of find ourselves in. And now, of the three, hosts of this show, Mike almost assuredly has read the Declaration of Independence the most recently. And I'll admit it's been quite a few years for me since I read it. But this YouTuber read part of the Declaration, which, if you need a little brush up on your, high school civics, the Declaration of Independence is mainly just a list of things that King George was doing that the people of the colonies didn't like. And the things on this list from 250 years ago are shockingly, disturbingly similar to many of the things happening today. And so, this YouTuber, who again has nothing to do with politics, read a few samples from the Declaration, and I'm going to share those with you now, the ones that he read, with a little bit of my own commentary afterward. So, he has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. he has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He's combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. And so, think back to the events of this first year of this administration. During that time, the federal government has sent not just ICE, but also the Marines and various National Guards into U.S. cities, deployed the military, and basically waged war on Venezuela without even notifying Congress, didn't even tell them about it, told ICE and the Border Patrol that they have total immunity, and didn't even start investigations into the shootings that they did in Minneapolis before, a lot of public backlash about it, and also pardoning basically anyone who the president sees as loyal to him. They imposed tariffs that even this current very conservative Supreme Court seems real skeptical of. They've detained people, including citizens, for hours or even days without them being arrested at all, without them being read their rights, and with no way to actually get compensated for being detained that whole time for that violation of their rights, because you can't sue the agents. You're just not allowed to do that. There's no way to get any, compensation for that violation. You just can't. And they've also deported people to countries that they've never even been to, on continents that they've never been on, including in some cases to places that are like active war zones, like Sudan, despite, the person that they're deporting to this country in Africa being from South America. They don't care. Anybody who will take these people, they'll take them, let alone all the people that got sent to CCOT, the, torture prison in El Salvador. The founders of this country got a few things wrong, to put it mildly, when they set this country up. But when they're right, they're right. And they knew how to spot a tyrannical government because they were living in one. And if you don't think that the way the federal government, and in particular the president, are acting is way too similar to what the signers of the Declaration of Independence were declaring independence from, then I think you should really take some time and think about why you think that, and read those documents that we all claim are so important to us from the founding of this country. I'd also suggest you take some time and listen to a different YouTube video that's very well done by a channel called Moon Channel. I'll have that link down below as well. Normally, they focus on the various laws around video games, which is why I find them entertaining and interesting. But the lawyer who actually makes the videos is actually an immigration lawyer by training. And the video gives a lot of good context about how ICE was formed, why it's able to act the way it does with so few guardrails, and why what it's doing now is the logical conclusion to how the whole agency was set up in the first place in the aftermath of 9/11. And I say all of this not to, scare people or to even convince you to go out and march in the streets or anything, but just to try to give you that little bit of hope that it gave me, that, people have been through this kind of thing before, and as overwhelming as it seems, there is hope at the end of the tunnel there, to mix metaphors. But yeah, to give you that spark of hope that I found in these places over the last couple of weeks, and to use that hope to do what the people of Minnesota have been doing in supporting their neighbors and working with people in their communities to make them stronger, because that's what's going to get us through this. Not posting memes online, not debating in comment sections with, a random keyboard across the internet who's probably just a bot anyway, but forming actual human connection with the people around you and supporting them when they need it. Because that is one of the only things that has ever successfully fought authoritarianism from the inside, and that's how we'll get through all of this together. So I know everybody has shared their opinion on these things by this point, but we only put out an episode every other week. So these were just my thoughts, and I just wanted to share them with you for whatever that's worth. So, yeah, we will see you all again in a couple of weeks, and until then, take care.